Hello, Heart-Centered Tech, and welcome to day 2 of the Heart-Centered Tech Summit. Yesterday, we had a great panel with Ted Ross and the modernization of corporate and enterprise performance management within government agencies, which highlighted some incredible insights on where governments are moving and what they're trying to do. And then we had incredible fireside chat for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month with Lisa Lapointe of Terra Nova Securities, and she is a heart-centered tech leader that had created cybersecurity kits that we're giving out remotely for this month. And today we are honored and pleased without any hesitation to introduce Susan Steinbrecher, the author of Heart-Centered Leadership and Meaningful Alignment. She has been a heart-centered leader for decades. She trains heart-centered leaders. She helps corporations navigate through this leadership with her philosophies. She is also a heart-centered tech leader as well for all her work in the technology industry, helping leaders perform better. I'd like to welcome today Susan Steinbrecher from Steinbrecher Associates. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Jude. Thank you. Welcome. I'm excited to be here and to share the 7 principles and corresponding virtues in my book, Heart-Centered Leadership. So that's what I plan to cover today. So we do a virtual workshop around this where you can—
We'd love to see you, Susan, by the way.
Nope,
we're seeing the PowerPoint.
Yes. Yes, you are.
Okay. We're hoping to see your face at some point.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. You might have to click on the gallery or whatever to see me, but you're not visible anymore. I've got your icon showing on my screen. So you have to go to video to show yourself.
Okay, we do have your icon up. Great, we're good.
Yeah. Okay. And everybody, and so Jude, can you see my slides?
Yes, I can. Great,
okay.
Ready to go.
Right,
Sorry about that little technical hiccup, but we're on our way.
Well, that's the world we're in, isn't it?
Yeah, it comes with the territory now, right?
Exactly.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, carry on.
No worries at all. Okay. Well, as I was saying, we do have a workshop, a virtual workshop on heart-centered leadership where we take a really deep dive into the 7 principles and virtues I'm going to introduce to you today. But today I'm going to give you kind of a broad macro overview and a brief introduction of each. And I think, honestly, we all can agree we are dealing with some incredibly unprecedented times. Stress levels are very high. And so building our endurance and building our emotional resilience is going to be really important, obviously, during these really challenging times. So we're also social beings. We are intended to connect with other people and see people and give them a hug and those kinds of things. And as you know, right now, that's becoming more challenging. And even though we can connect in platforms like this is great, but it's not the same. And we all know that. We also know right now, statistically, that just shows the impact that emotionally, physically, spiritually, the impact that these times are having. We know that the divorce filing rate is up. We know that substance abuse rates are up. We know that child abuse rates are up. We know domestic abuse rate is up. And all those are symptoms of us really striving to be the human being that we are, and that is to connect and engage and be with other people. And that's, again, more challenging in our current time, more the reason why it's so important for us to build that endurance and build that resilience that we're all going to need to navigate through this very carefully. So that being said, I am going to share with you now the 7 principles and corresponding virtues of heart-centered leadership. I'm going to cover each one of these briefly and share a little bit about what we mean by each of these and how this connects to building endurance and resiliency as well. And I'm actually going to start with the very first one called Know Thyself. So when Dr. Joel Bennett and I co-authored this work, we said, okay, the very first principle absolutely has to be know thyself. And the reason we said that is we all have that tendency to look outside ourselves, whether it's to blame somebody else for a circumstance or to judge another person for something that's happening. But the really important thing when you're a leader, whether that is a teacher leading students, whether that is a principal leading teachers, whether that is a parent in the home, whether that is in a business environment with direct reports, we are all leaders of self first and foremost. And one of the most important things is for us to look in the mirror and own how we are showing up every day, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, because it's not fun when we recognize that we're saying things or doing things that's not resourceful or helpful, either to ourselves or to other folks. So this one's just really important. So it's about taking that honest assessment and saying, what's working for me right now? How am I doing right now? And taking the time for the self-reflection and that introspection is critical to building endurance, because you got to start with, how am I doing? And then based on how you're answering that, what is the impact on me, or what is the impact on others as a result of what I'm doing? And then what is at least one step I choose to take in order to close the gap, if you will, between this is how I'm showing up and this is the way I want to be showing up. So asking yourself those questions, but looking inside happens to be the last place we typically look. And that's where it really all has to start, is that it's the inside game, as I like to refer to it. I'm going to read you a parable that is something that we cover in our workshop. And then in our workshop, we break people into smaller groups. We have a group coach so that we can have very deep and rich experiences and discussions in those smaller groups. And one of the exercises that we do is we read this parable and we reflect on, what does this really mean to each of us? And I'm going to take a moment to read that parable to you now. It's a Native American parable, and it says, in a Native American parable, the creator gathers all of his animals together and says, I want to hide something from my human children until they are really ready for it. It's the realization that they create their own experiences. Well, give it to me. I'll fly it to the moon, says the eagle. No, says the creator. One day they will go there and find it. How about at the bottom of the ocean, says the salmon. No, says the creator. They will find it there too. I will bury it in the Great Plains, says the buffalo. No, they will soon dig and find it there, says the creator. Then put it inside of themselves, says the wise grandmother mole. Done, says the creator. It's the last place they'll look. So that parable is just another example or an analogy of, we have a tendency to look outside versus inside. And that's our very first principle. And what I want to also share with you is this iceberg analogy or metaphor. We've all seen the iceberg. We know that the tip of the iceberg above the waterline is what people see. It's what we have a tendency to share, and it's what people see. But the mass, the foundation of who we are, is under that waterline. And so it's all that what resides there is our belief systems, our mental models, I call that, our motivations, the foundation and core of who we are. And we don't typically show that part of it, although it gets reflected often in our behavior and what we say and what we do. The reason I like to look at this is one of those things where the more that we're willing to lower the waterline a little bit and show sort of transparency and authenticity, the more that we're able to connect and engage with other people. We've all had leaders in our lives that when you really appreciated their transparency or their humanness, whether they're in a meeting or a presentation or sharing a story, whatever that is, those are all things that are very endearing to us and connects us to those individuals. In our workshop, we do this exercise called If You Really Knew Me. And so for 2 minutes, you're partnered with another individual and you just keep sharing. If you really knew me, you would know. If you really knew me, you would know. And then it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And people are amazed at how much gets revealed in a matter of 2 minutes. So just another part of this thought around the know thyself and coming to terms with how we're showing up in the world. Our second principle is called don't judge, don't assume, instead come to understand. And this is incredibly difficult for us, but so important. I promise you, your life will change if you can shift from judgment and assumption to coming to understand another individual. And the reason this is so difficult for us is because our brain is wired to judge. It's wired to judge for protection and for security purposes. In other words, somebody's approaching us, walking down the street, immediately our brain goes, is this person safe? Am I in a good place? What's going on around me? I'm looking around my whole terrain. I'm trying to assess the risk. All of that is happening in a physical human being way. And so since our brain will default to judgment, it takes work and effort and building sort of the muscle, if you will, to shift that to a place of at least trying to be open-minded enough to come to understand another human being. So I'll give you a quick example of what happened with a client of mine. I got a call. I do a lot of executive coaching. I received a call from the CFO of a hospitality company, and that individual said, I want to talk to you about coaching one of my vice presidents, one of my leaders. She's been with us 10 years, but she's technically very strong, but we just can't tolerate her another day. Of course, I'm in the middle listening to this going, okay, wait a minute. She's been working with you 10 years, but you can't tolerate her another day. Like, wow, what's going on here? As a coach, I know that nobody picks up the phone and calls me unless something is going on, right? And so I want to know what is going on now. And so why now are you calling me? So I asked him, I said, so why now are you calling me? You've said she's worked with you 10 years, obviously, unless she's dramatically changed her behavior, this is who she's always been. He's like, oh, well, yeah, I can answer that. So 3 of her very best people walked out on her today. Said, I cannot work with this woman another moment. Well, now I get the why and the why now. That's a huge impact based on her performance or her behavior. So I said, all right, let me talk to her and find out what's happening, because here's something, guys, I've always believed. I don't believe people jump out of bed in the morning with the intention to disappoint other people. I just don't believe that. I mean, I think maybe there may be that really small percent that do that, but most of us have positive intention. That doesn't mean our behavior has the right impact, but most of us have positive intention. And isn't that different? I mean, when you know that somebody has done something maybe hurtful to you and they had poor intention, isn't that different than when they don't? Of course it is. It still doesn't excuse the behavior, but the intention does matter. So I thought, all right, I don't want to judge her. I don't understand her circumstance. I want to talk to her and find out what's going on. So I meet with her one-on-one, and I just said, hey, what's going on? So 15 minutes goes by, 30 minutes goes by, 40 minutes goes by. She's talking to me about her people and all the things that are wrong, and she's complaining about them. And then she's saying things like, Susan, you just don't understand. And my boss just doesn't understand. These people are just stupid. So of course I'm looking at this and going, oh my gosh, Houston, we have a problem. I think I know what's going on here. So she was stuck in judgment, and I knew I needed to do a program interrupt. Well, what does that mean? We've all been in situations when we have watched a television show and then that program is interrupted by a commercial to land a whole different message. So that's what I knew I needed to do. I needed to interrupt her judgment program because it was clearly not serving her at all. And I knew I was not going to be able to get anything done if I couldn't break through. So this is what I did. I said, wow, that's amazing. And she just looked at me like, what? What do you mean that's amazing? And that's exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for that sort of shake of the head where I was kind of rattling things up in her brain. And she's like, what do you mean? I don't get what you mean. And I said, wow, I think this is unbelievable. Like, I want to learn your strategy. Like, this is really interesting to me. And she's like, what are you talking about? My strategy? So I'm like, oh, good. I'm getting in there deeper. I'm rattling up the brain here. She's breaking state. And I just said, well, I guess I just want to know, how is it possible that you've hired only stupid people? Right? And of course, she's like, what? And I'm like, well, there's a whole other possibility here. And she's like, well, what is that? Again, I'm further breaking it up. This is good. I've got her out of the judgment. And I said, well, the other possibility is that, okay, maybe they were hired smart and they became stupid working for you. Gosh, I hope not, right? And she's like, what? I don't think so. And I thought, oh, but wait, there's another whole possibility. And now I've got her. She's like, what is that? And I said, I think it's possible that they're not stupid. What do you think? And she's like, okay, I get it. So now I had her out of the judgment. Now she's listening to me. And I said, hey, listen, here's the deal. You have expectations, and rightfully so. Your people are performing at a certain level, and there's a gap. Don't make anything more than that about this. You have an expectation, they're performing at a certain level, and we have a gap. My job is to help you close that gap. She's like, okay, I get it, because it's not serving you very well. And she agreed it wasn't. So, by the way, when I coach somebody, I do a 360 interview process. I interview everyone around that individual. I capture word for word verbatim while protecting the confidentiality of the comments, and I put it in the report. I meet with her. I interviewed all her direct reports, including the 3 people that walked out, and she's reading her report, and she starts to see these comments because people told me in the interviews, they even said to me, no lie, they said, I think she thinks we're stupid or something. I don't know what this is. And of course, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just taking my notes. But in my mind, I'm going, oh my gosh, if they only knew. So she reads that in the report and she's like, oh, I never told them they were stupid. And I said, oh, but yes, you have. Because here's what you need to get. 55% of a message coming across from sender to receiver in a critical dialogue such as these comes from body language alone. 38% by the tone of voice, 7% are just the words that you have shared. Now here's the problem. When you are thinking one thing and saying something else, we project so much more what's in our head than we have any awareness of. So as a leader of folks in our homes or in a school environment or in a work environment or in a community environment, be mindful aware that you are always on stage and you're projecting a lot of what you're thinking. What we know is that when you give somebody an incongruent message, they hear words you're saying, but they just get this feeling. You're saying something else. We've all experienced that, haven't we? Of course we have. That's an incongruent message. I hear one thing, but I'm feeling something else. You put people in a forced choice. Which do I believe? The words I hear or this feeling I'm getting? Which do you believe? Guaranteed 100% of you are going to believe the feeling that you got. And the reason is the body can't lie. The heart does not lie. Unless you're a sociopath, that's a clinical issue, and that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about normal, healthy people, right? You are wired to sense truth. Again, another safety security measure for your body. So you will believe what you're feeling, not what you hear. So be careful if you're saying something to somebody and you're saying all the right words and in your mind you're going, Johnny's a loser, more than likely that's projecting. So what does it have to do with endurance and resiliency? Recognize that we are naturally one to judge. It takes work. It takes taking care of self. And again, I'm going to spend a lot more time when I get to principle 7 on ways to build that resiliency and endurance, but be mindful of the fact that everybody's in this space, and having some empathy and compassion and open-mindedness to other people's viewpoints will be pretty important. All right, our next principle is called they need what you need. So regardless of your position, your title, where you live, the car that you drive, your race, your gender, your generation, as human beings, at the core of the core, we have that same fundamental human need to be respected, to be loved, to be cared about, to be empathized with, to be listened to be appreciated, regardless of all the things I mentioned. At the core, all of us want and need those needs to be fulfilled. And we are constantly seeking that from others to help fulfill that, as we need to fulfill that within ourselves, as I mentioned. And this is all about the virtue here is the importance of authenticity. It's about telling the truth. It's about sharing what you know as much as you can. And I recognize you're a publicly traded organization. You can't always share information. I get it. This is about sharing what you can share. Because right now, especially now with COVID-19 times, what we know for sure is that the leadership skill needed most is empathy, transparency, and compassion. People are struggling. And just because you might manage it a little bit differently than someone else, we need to be mindful and aware that people are struggling in their own ways, which may or may not be the same as your own. So that's important to be in touch with that and share what you can share with full transparency. The other thing I like to show is this quote around this principle, because I think it just says it so perfectly. You know, in the chess game of life, if you will, once the game is over, the king and the pawn, again, regardless of title, position, stature, go back in the same box. At the end of the day, we're all going into the box. And so in this lifetime, it's about how do we fulfill those personal needs as well as help others fulfill those needs. Again, respected, cared for, listened to, empathized with, appreciated, etc. Next principle is called letting go. And this is also incredibly difficult to do, and especially now. And I share that because in COVID-19 times, working in virtual space, we want control. We want control in our life. And yet the truth is, in order to build the endurance and the resilience that you need, you're going to have to let go. Because you can't control everything. You can't control this virus unless you can, which if that's the case, please let us all know, right? So it's about focusing on what we can influence, focus on what you can control and influence, and letting go of the other pieces. And so it's the detaching from trying to control everything within our environment and trusting we're going to be okay. And so one of the ways that I like, to help with something like this is to do an assessment with that and to say, okay, of my current situation, what can I actually control here? All right, if I can't control it, of my current situation, what can I actually influence or inspire someone to do something or be something? And then based on that, what can I let go of? And it's just going to be what it's going to be. And having that mindset will shift significantly your stress level. Because in terms of building endurance and resilience, it is all about the stress that we're on. How do we build the endurance and resilience so that we feel less stress, so that we're not hijacked, what I call out of our critical thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. Instead, the amygdala is activated, which is our fight, flight, or freeze response. And we know that's not healthy because the adrenaline is pumped through your body, cortisol levels go higher, all of that puts significant damage to the body. And that's what we're trying to mitigate. So the more that we can become at peace with some things that we really can't control, the better off we're going to be. Again, not always easy to do. A best practice I use is I ask myself, what is the worst thing that can happen? If I can deal with it and address it, whatever it is, what is the worst thing that can happen? Then I can at least look at that and say, okay, based on that, what can I now do? What can I take action on? What can I control or influence based on my answer to that question? And then I always want you to entertain the third question, which is, what is the best thing that can happen as a result of this? I think a lot of us has seen some of the silver lining in all that we are dealing with now. We've seen situations where we're like, okay, you know what? I've saved a 2-hour commute, or I'm learning I can be actually productive at home. Some people have a better situation than that, or there's so many things. Or you know what? I haven't sat and had dinner with my family in the longest time. I'm having dinner with my family every night now. So there is the silver lining there, and it's looking for that, and it's focusing on that helps us build that trust that we're going to get through all of this. The next principle is called know the impact of your words and actions. And this is also incredibly important as a leader, regardless if you're the leader in the home, the leader in a school, the leader in a business, the leader in your community. Know that I like to use the analogy of leaders are goldfish swimming around in that glass fishbowl, just minding their own business, doing their thing, but they forget and they're not mindful and aware that everybody's looking through that glass bowl, and that glass is transparent and translucent and often magnifies behavior. And people are looking through that glass and they're watching this leader, the things that they say and the things that they do, and like it or not, they're placing judgment on what they see and what they absorb and what they observe. So knowing that you're always on stage as a leader and what impact that has. So when you tell the truth, when you are transparent, when you share, hey, I'm scared too, what's the impact of that? When you hoard information and don't share, what's the impact of that? When you go to somebody and say, I get it, these are really difficult times, how can I help you? What's the impact of that? You get the point. I also want to share another story of a client that I worked with that it just comes perfectly aligned with this particular principle. This is a person who was in charge of HR for a small company that had acquired and acquired and acquired and acquired all these other organizations. It was a technology company. And they kept acquiring other organizations, so they were getting larger and larger and larger. And it was going to be time for their company-wide conference. This is when we could be together in a meeting room, in a ballroom space. And she hired me to coach her on her presentation skills because she said, Susan, I used to know everybody here when we were this size company. Now I'm going to have 1,800 people in the audience. They don't know me and I don't know them. And I have got to put my best foot forward and basically introduce myself to most of them as the HR leader of this organization. So she hired me to help her with her speech. And the first question I asked her was, at the end of that presentation, what do you want people to walk away knowing, thinking, and feeling about you? And she was surprised by the question because she thought I was just going to give her facilitation techniques. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get to that. But right now I want to begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey would say, and say, what's the impact you're trying to create? What is it that you're looking for people to feel about you? And so she could give me the list. She goes, I want them to see me as the, consummate professional, and that I am the leader of people in this organization, and that I have integrity, and I'm authentic, and all of those things. And I said, okay, wrote all those words down. Based on that, we backed up, we figured out what the presentation was going to look like, and all is good. So fast forward, it is the morning of the ballroom space, morning of her presentation. She's going to appear on stage. I'm in the audience because, flew to Orlando for this conference, even though she was headquartered in the Dallas area, and which is where I reside. Flew to Orlando, was coaching her some additional more that morning and warming up and having her practice. She's going to get on stage shortly. Imagine this huge ballroom space, 1,800 people spread around this room. It's so large, the people all the way in the back, there's television screens mounted for them to see the person on stage, because of course that's so far from where they're sitting. So television screens everywhere. And then she comes on stage and she presented her speech. And she nailed it. She did a beautiful job, and I was incredibly proud of her. And I wish I could tell you that that was the end of the story, but unfortunately it's not. I get on a plane and I fly home thinking, we're good, like mission accomplished, check, right? Well, later that evening was an awards presentation, and it turns out that she had had 4, 5, 6 cocktails prior. And she is presenting awards, and she's drunk, is what I heard happen later. I wasn't there to see it. And she's dropping her awards. She's giving awards to the wrong names. And it got so bad that the CEO had to take over. And of course, somebody tells me this later. And so I'm like, wow, I'll give her about a year. And it was about a year when she was let go, a company she had been with for 25 years. Now, this is not a story about whether you should drink or not drink. That is an individual choice. That is a know thyself choice. But I will tell you that this is one of those situations where you have to recognize the impact that you're making. She made a certain impact that morning, and she made a very different one that evening. And which one do you think people left with? Unfortunately, the one that evening. So just again, be mindful. You're always on stage in a leader, whatever that leadership position may be, whether that's the parent, or whether that's the principal, or whether that's the teacher, or whether that's the boss. The next principle is called associates have a choice. They're going to ultimately decide whether they want to follow you or not. Just because you're the boss, you have position power, right? But personal power is something quite different. It's the difference between compliance and commitment. I can comply with a boss because I'm afraid I'll lose my job, but am I committed? One of the exercises in our workshop that we cover is we ask people to think about the best boss they ever had in their entire career. Just whenever it was, best boss he ever had. And then to talk about the behaviors that person demonstrated. What did they say and do that made you think of that best boss? And then as a result of those behaviors, what kind of impact did that person have on you? Well, I have probably shared that exercise with a thousand at least people at this point. And you know what always comes and hits that list? Things like, that boss believed in me, cared about me as a whole human being, and a person outside of just being the worker. That person trusted me, they empowered me, they stretched me, they believed in me, they did all those things. And as a result, I wanted to work my hardest to not let this person down. I was motivated to perform at my very highest level. Right? So there is again that difference between complying with what I'm supposed to do or committing to not wanting to let my boss down. And if you're in a leadership position, what more can you possibly ask for than to have associates that would do absolutely everything they can to be sure they're performing at their best, because they would cringe if they let you down. No better position to be in than something like that. our last principle is called care for the heart. Lead well, live well. And this particular principle is all about taking care of self. It is about looking at how do we build that endurance? How do we build the resiliency? It's about looking and saying, what is the best thing I can do to take care of self as a leader? So when Dr. Joel Bennett and I wrote the book, Heart-Centered Leadership, we did not want to write yet another leadership book. There are thousands of leadership books. What we wanted to do is to make this principle virtue-based, as we're doing. What we wanted to do is to say, we need to first deal with the health of the leader, mind, body, and spirit, because they are a human being who is showing up every day doing the best they know how to do. And it takes tremendous energy and endurance to be a leader today, regardless of what you're a leader of. Again, home, work, school, etc., community. And so we wanted to approach this in a more holistic way. So we did that through what we call mind, body, and spirit, building endurance and resiliency. So let's just take the mind part for a moment. That is asking yourself a couple of questions and making some choices so that you have the endurance that you need and the stamina that you need and the resiliency that you need. So around the mind portion, the question for me, for you is, who are you surrounding yourself with? We've all heard the term toxic people. Some of those people, maybe you can't escape. I've had people say to me, Susan, you don't understand. My sister's toxic and I can't help but be in the same house with this person. Whatever that is, I get it. My point though is where you have choice, are you choosing to be around people that drag you down, that you know how you feel when you're with those individuals? You know if you're on your best, or you know if you're like drained, right? So it's around who are you surrounding yourself with? Also, what are you listening to? What are you reading? So I always say, turn off the news, okay? Listen, we need to be aware. I understand. I'm not suggesting you put your head in the sand, but do you need to hear the same news cycle over and over and over and over? No. I mean, here's the true test. After listening to the news, if you feel uplifted, full of possibility, encouraged, and inspired, then listen to it. However, if you're feeling like, oh, depressed, frustrated, don't listen to it. Listen, I listen to the news enough to get an idea of what's happening, then turn it off. Why? Because I can't control that stuff. I can't. If I could control or influence some of that stuff that's going on, then I'd be all in a heartbeat. But when I know I can't, I don't want to keep polluting my brain and my mind with that kind of stuff. It's also about purposely and strategically putting yourself into positive, resourceful states, because music you listen to, classical or uplifting, or things that really bring you joy, listening to podcasts that are uplifting or inspiring, making sure that you're putting pieces into your life that are really going to be value add and helpful to you. That's what we mean by that, the whole mind part. What's the mental tape that's running? Catching yourself when you're realizing you're going down a spiral, and instead asking yourself, what's a better way of looking at this? Is there a more resourceful way to tap into this? It's catching where you are and flipping the switch. Okay. So how about the body part? Well, the body part is all about taking care of the physical vessel. So adequate sleep. Most of us don't get adequate sleep. I mean, there's a lot of folks that would tell me they average 5 or 6 hours. That's not enough. We need that 8, and some are even saying now 9 hours to really recharge the body. So some tips around that. Turn off all electronics. I'm sorry, we're doing electronics right now. But before you're ready to go to sleep, the latest research is 2 hours prior, turn off all electronics. Now, for some people, that's going to be a drastic change because people fall asleep by television. I get it. But what we know is getting away from the blue screen, getting away from the electronics, beginning to unwind our body so that we can more quickly go into a restful state when we are trying to fall asleep. We also know trying to pick about the same time to fall asleep, meaning 10 o'clock lights out kind of thing, whatever works for you, but a decent hour also helps because it builds the sort of the habitual muscle in the body that your body starts to get conditioned. It's time to start to fall asleep at a certain time. We also know the cooler the temperature is and the darker the room, the better for sleeping. It goes back to caveman days where we dwelled in caves. I mean, really, it's a lot of this goes back to just how we are wired, our DNA, our ancestry, etc. So those are some tips on the sleep piece for sure. People said, well, I like to read and fall asleep. Well, I'm questioning that as well, because that is, what are you reading? Something really stimulating that's going to be harder to wind down again and fall asleep. So it's a matter of doing other things that are going to serve the body better. For example, meditation. Mindfulness meditation is the one that we have learned in our latest research in terms of what we do as a company. We developed a program called Meaningful Alignment. How do you build alignment with another individual, especially when the stakes are high, with emotional composure and resilience, while you're facilitating the potential negative emotion of the other person. That's a whole nother program we offer. But my point of that is to say, we know that mindfulness meditation impacts, it's the only thing that impacts mind, body, and spirit. My personal practice is I do a 30-minute meditation. Part of it's mindfulness, part of it is visualization of what I want to have and what I want to manifest. I'm putting loving kindness as part of that, trying to send loving kindness to those that I know are truly struggling. Everything is energy at the end of the day. I feel that things transfer. So for me, that is a best practice. I find myself to be much more grounded and much more neutral emotionally, if you will, or what we I forgot the word. There's a particular word we often use for that. It'll come to me. But it's one of those things about neutralizing a negative emotion so that you can more freely sort of move from one state to the other without getting emotionally triggered and hijacked and charged. So also on the physical part, besides sleep, it's diet. What are we putting in the vessel? What we know is that when we're in a high stress state, cortisol levels are shot up, adrenaline is activated. That has a tendency to affect our insulin levels, and that means we crave sugar. I mean, have you noticed that? You're going to crave sugar. You're going to crave more simple carbs when we're in that heightened emotional state, and that's because insulin levels have been elevated. So what does that mean? It means the cleaner the diet that you can eat, the better. Plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables, the right kinds of proteins, organic if possible, anything that you can do to literally take care of that vessel, especially during times like now, will build resilience. And then the other aspect is exercise around the physical domain. So at times like now, I'm encouraging people to do less of the high octane types of exercise. Why? Because it raises cortisol levels when we go out and sprint as fast as we can. Yes, that may feel good, the endorphin levels, yes, but it's also a high octane type of sport. Instead, what would really serve people best in terms of building endurance through these times are going to be things like yoga, stretches. It's going to be things like Pilates, a little bit lower impact stretching and muscle building, but not as high octane, walking, those kinds of things. So individual choice, of course. I'm just giving you some suggestions in terms of things that might serve you most effectively now in terms of the endurance we're trying to build through these crazy times. And then the last piece is the spirit side of the mind, body, and spirit, if you will. In this part, this is all about the recognizing our calling, our personal mission. What are we on this earth to do? What is this all about for us? Those kinds of things. And we build the spiritual domain through, for some people, it's about prayer. For others, it's about meditation again. For others, it is about coming up with a personal mission statement. For others, it can be built through journaling, through gratitude list, through acts of kindness to others. For all of those kinds of things really help us build, if you will, that endurance, or that's under the spiritual domain, helps us build that endurance. So mind, body, spirit is going to help you most right now, focusing on that. Again, meditation, especially mindfulness meditation, helps us around on all three domains. The one thing is people will sometimes say, gosh, I don't have time to do that. And what I just suggest, even if it's 5 minutes, folks, even if it's 5 minutes to do nothing but deep breathing, even if you are literally deep breathing and you're focusing on the breath, that is going to calm the system down. Meditation does it even more, but the truth is it's about getting out of the head, having that amygdala in the brain, the fight, flight, or freeze response being activated, right? We're trying to get out of that portion of the brain into the prefrontal cortex, which is our critical thinking skills, our perspective thinking, our long-term planning thinking. All of that comes from that portion of the brain. And that's what we're trying to actually activate versus getting hijacked emotionally in the other. Because we all know when we're in a fight, flight, or freeze response, we're not operating out of our best. And honestly, haven't you noticed when you are in a heightened state of fear, you don't think clearly? Well, there's a reason for that. We're not activating the right part of the brain, right? So these things, doing these things. So for example, the gratitude list. I don't care if you start with the lamest thing that you can have gratitude for, but take out the piece of paper and commit to, let's say, 10 things that you are grateful for. I'm grateful to have a roof over my head. I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful that I have a car. I'm grateful that I have a job, whatever that is. The more you focus on those kinds of things, the more that you build that resilience again, because it shifts your perspective. It flips the switch from the negative and the doom and the gloom into something that is full of possibility, uplifting, and inspiring. So those kinds of things are some of the tips to help us build the resilience. So what I want to share with you is I gave you a very broad overview today of the kinds of things that we cover in our meeting, in our Heart Center Leadership Workshop. So what we actually have designed is an 8-hour workshop that is divided into bite-sized pieces. So for example, we take the 8 hours and we do 2 hours at a time. So module A is 2 hours, and what we cover in that is what you see. We do the introduction to Heart Center Leadership. We talk about what this is all about. We introduce the first principle of Know Thyself that I shared. They have a quick homework journal reflection. We are going to get them practicing journaling in the actual workshop so that they can have the practice of that writing, and then we come back on the next session, module B, and in that what we are covering is principle 2, the don't assume, don't judge, come to understand. We also introduce principle 3, they need what you need. And then once again, we do a quick homework assignment. All the homework is intended to be maximum time 30 minutes. We know people are crazy busy, so we don't want to take up too much of their time, but we want the continuity between each of the modules because they are often spread out 1 or 2 weeks apart. And then we jump back into module C on the third week or third time that we meet. We introduce the letting go. Each of these modules and each of these principles, we take a deep dive practice with exercises you're partnered with another person in the virtual environment, or you're partnered with a team of 4 or 5 others. We constantly keep moving and shifting that around so that you're learning from each of those folks, all facilitated with a group coach to help make sure that facilitation is there, to make sure every person is heard, make sure the deep dive that we're intending to take happens and that the learning is actually occurring. And then we go into module D and we talk about principles 6 and 7. They complete a development plan, and we do, of course, our closing pieces. And there's follow-up pieces that we send after. When someone attends this workshop, they also get a whole separate standalone book and journal that they work together. It's a self-study guide that they can continue to develop the skills around the 7 principles and virtues through that apparatus as well. And then for this group in particular, Jude and I have come up with dates if you're interested in attending and taking this deeper dive on heart-centered leadership so that we are building that resilience and composure and endurance. October 27th will be module A. November 10th is module B. November 24th is module C. And December 8th is module D, all 4 to 6 p.m. Pacific time. And all that information is on Jude's website and social media platforms and all the information that he has presented. So that's it. That is the broad overview of the 7 principles and virtues of heart-centered leadership, and some tips and tools and some things for you to adopt to help you build the endurance and the resilience that you need at this time. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Susan. It's been wonderful to hear you expedite us through these principles. Also, when I had approached Susan at the beginning to be a part of the summit, it was about endurance. And, you know, we've all been there. We've all had moments of being a heart-centered leader. We've needed to now deal with this ongoing stress in our lives that we've inherited, this new world that's not going away. And I have to say, the endurance of the mind, body, spirit, that was pretty insightful. And I didn't ever think of turning off electronics 2 hours prior before I go to sleep. That's kind of a new one for me. You know, the sleep thing, the dark room, things like that. Yes, eating close to the ground. You know, sometimes I do know I have to do high exercise just to release the steam in the kettle.
I get it.
Very tough to sit and do yoga when you're fuming, but you know, it's really great to just get back to the earth with this. And you know, before all of this, the pandemic, it used to be like, oh, I'm going to take the weekend and I'll do yoga and I'll do my mind, body, spirit was my hobby, separate from
That's
my
great. You know, there's something you just brought up, Jude, that I wanted to share also about that. Is another thing I meant to mention is getting out in the environment, right? Getting out in nature. It's amazing the calming effect that can have. So maybe take the walk, but just getting out in nature. I mean, it's just crazy the difference, how different you feel. And as much as you can, I know some of our folks in California feel so bad with the fires. I'm sure that's incredibly difficult for you to do right now, obviously. But where you can, really, even if it's your own yard, folks, I mean, literally just get outside, you know?
Yeah, no, you know, bless all of them, what they're going through. I lost my home in Sedona to a home fire.
Oh, no, I love Sedona.
It was a while ago. However, you know, you lose a lot of personal items, you lose a lot of things during those times. One of the things that actually kept us going was we ended up owning, I owned a TV station there, and we had to keep it going after the house burnt down, and we also lost the office with it.
Oh my
We
gosh.
decided that we needed assistance in our gratitude, because when you're in a place of great loss, it's very hard to feel grateful.
Yes.
Mainly you're feeling resentment and anger and hurt, and why me, and why am I going through this? And what we did was we had a lot of commercial breaks we had to fill. So we invited people in, and we called it Attitude Gratitude. And
Mhm.
they each would just talk about what they were grateful for 30 seconds. And we littered the TV station with people saying they were grateful. And it was a reminder, because we just needed to be reminded, we've still got to be grateful. We still have a TV station. We didn't die. We have this, we have that. But it was hard every day not to fall into a self-pity moment with that and become a victim.
Sure.
But I do think attitude, and I do believe fake it till you can make it when it comes
Yeah.
to attitude.
Sometimes it's what you have
Even
to
if you
do.
don't believe it, you got to say the words of positive reinforcement and
Yeah.
just kind of force yourself into making sure that that's going to be, your mission is to be grateful. And I definitely think you delivered on your promise to talk about heart-centered leadership endurance,
Thank you.
and all these things. And basically it's self-care and focusing on your own heart. It's very simple, getting back to basics. And I think now more than ever is the time for us to really be careful and take care of ourselves. So that was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. And thanks for allowing me the opportunity to share this work. It's interesting because Dr. Joel Bennett and I, when we co-authored, our first edition was, I cannot even believe this as I'm saying this now, 16 years ago. And people said to us, you have completely lost your mind. The words heart and leadership do not exist in the same sentence. And we said, you know what? That may be true, but it needs to. So we don't care. We're going to throw it out there. We're going to see it's going to resonate with some and not others. And, so fast forward in time, it was 5 years ago, my publicist said, okay, now there's like 30,000 books with the word heart and leadership in the same sentence. You are kind of a decade ahead. You guys need to re-release it. So we re-released the second edition, and we updated all of the research and the studies that shows there's positive correlation between, taking care of self and leading in this way and positive financial performance. Like people like, oh yeah, but this is nice, but can you make any money doing this? Absolutely you can. In fact, we found the best of the best organizations. We can show the correlations, and I've got all kinds of stats around that. So anyway, that was kind of funny how we got started with it, but it's resonating to this day, and we're thrilled.
Thank you so much, Susan, for being at the Heart-Centered Tech Summit today. And I'll end the recording right now. And